Hello, friends. I'm Rabbi Greg. Welcome to Torah Saturday. We are going to be studying a very interesting case in Parshat Pinchas about Zelophehad's daughters. So we'll begin together with the blessing for a Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. All right, so let's get right into it. I will put, if you're watching the recording, the link to the source sheet will be in the chat. So so what's going on is there is a big census underway. God has told Moses and Eleazar to do a census of the different tribes. And they're going through and they're listing the different tribes and the genealogies. And then they, say how many people they were. And right in the middle of these genealogies, they say Zelophehad, he had no sons, only daughters, and it names the daughters. And this is right in the middle of a bunch of names of men. And then it keeps going. It keeps going with the census. But this is a little bit of a preview um, that, something is interesting may be happening with them. So then this is kind of, we're getting down to here are the various clans. Here we would see a typical, and the clans of the Naphtalites had 45,400 men. And the total enrollment of the Israelites, and remember, this is toward the end of the journey. We're coming to the end of the book of Numbers. This is coming to the end of the 40 years in the desert. So we're at a little over 600,000. And then can someone unmute and read 26:53 to 55, please?
Among these shall the land be apportioned as shares, according to the listed names. With larger groups, increase the share. With smaller groups, reduce the share. Each is to be assigned its share according to its enrollment. The land, moreover, is to be apportioned by lot, and the allotment shall be made according to the listings of their ancestral tribes.
Okay, thank you, Allison. Okay, so what's going on here? We've done this big census. The divine did not say to Moses why they were doing the census, but perhaps these verses can tell us why they did the census. What's going on here?
So they want to fairly give out land to according to how many people are going to be um, settled there,
Yeah.
how
And
many male heads of families, households, or however they count.
yeah, yeah. So it's trying to do things fairly. What does apportionment by lot mean?
It sounds to me as if, number one, they're thinking about an agricultural settlement. And then, secondly, nobody gets to pick the land on the river. There's an element of randomness in this,
Mhm.
such that nobody is favored.
Yeah, yeah. So on the one hand, looks like, okay, we're trying to figure out a fair way to give the land to people. Now, of course, what land are they talking about?
Land across the Jordan River.
Yeah, yeah, the promised land, the land of milk and honey, the land where other people are living at the moment, by the way, so we get into the conquest and all of that, part of the story later. But it's like, okay, we're kind of coming to the end game. We are getting ready. Aaron has died, Miriam has died, Moses has been told he's not going to enter the land. Um, Things are okay. When you're starting to divide up the homesteads, you're 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 getting to the end. Okay, so let's continue. That's kind of our backgrounder. Okay, that's our context. Now, could someone continue, please? Chapter 27.
I can go. The daughters of Zelophehad of Manasseh family, son of Hefer, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, son of Joseph, came forward. The names of the daughters were Malach, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tisra.
Thank you. So unusual to see women in a lineage. Where does their lineage goes back to? Do you notice anything about, their ancestry?
Yeah, back to Manasseh, son of Joseph.
Yeah, so this is, we got a lot, Joseph, huge hero of the book of Exodus, save the
And
people.
we
Uh,
bless our sons by Manasseh.
yeah, so, this is a big time family here. And for the perhaps, I don't know for sure, but perhaps for the first time we have women named from this family. Okay. And then came forward. What's going on there?
Would you say they're getting land? Coming forward to get land?
Yeah, perhaps. But all of the talk previously was about the men and the
Mhm.
men being assigned the land. So perhaps, yeah, they're coming forward relating to this issue of the land assignments.
Unless they're getting named.
Okay. So let's see what Rashi has to say. Why is it stated? Has it not already been said Ben Manasseh, and consequently we know that they belong to the family of Manasseh, son of Joseph? So someone want to continue from there, please?
Terrible reading.
Oh, I bet this is Marty coming in. So Rashi brings up this idea, just as Joseph held the promised land dear, and he asked that his bones be brought with them, and they are carrying Joseph's bones with them in the desert. And so the daughters also held the land dear and give us an inheritance. It's talking about their righteousness, um, that they were righteous. Everyone mentioned in pedigree. For in every case, when a person's doing and their ancestors' doings are nowhere plainly described, and scripture somewhere enters into the details of the pedigree in respect to one of them, tracing their genealogy back to someone worthy of praise, it is evident that the person in question is himself, or in this case, herself, a righteous person from a righteous family. But if it gives the genealogy in connection with something deserving of reprobation, as in this example, and is quite certain that all who are mentioned in connection with him are wicked people. So this is a long way of saying what? Hi, Marty.
Good morning.
So I think it's a long way of saying that even though there are no male offspring, that this is a righteous family and they deserve an entitlement, an allocation as much as anybody else does.
Yeah, yeah. It's talking about, and I would go even a step further, it's a righteous family, and that the righteousness has continued into the present generation. It's not like one of these, boy, it was a righteous family, and then where did this bad seed come from? But Rashi is arguing that the Torah style is if you're mentioning someone and they're going back to somebody righteous, then they are assumed to be righteous as well. Okay, so these righteous women, they're coming forward. As Shelley said, perhaps since there are no sons, they're going to be asking for an inheritance. Okay. So, Marty, you want to read? Are you in a position to read Numbers 24, 2 through 4?
Yeah, I just took 15 minutes to find the link today. Anyway, they stood before Moses, Eleazar, the priest, the chieftains, and the whole assembly at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and they said, our father died in the wilderness. He was not one of the faction, Korah's faction, that banded together against God, but died for his own sin, and he has left no sons. Let not our father's name be lost to his clan just because he had no son. Give us a holding among our father's kinsmen.
Thanks, Marty. Okay. So, yeah, the idea that Shelley had was correct. They're asking for a land holding, but they also say a lot of things here. You know, um, our father died in the wilderness. He was not one of the faction, Korah's faction. Do we, does anyone want to fill us in? What was Korah's faction? Who was Korah? Why would they bring this up here?
Because Korach led the rebellion against Moses, and then he and his followers were punished by the divine, swallowed by the earth, or had a uh, uh, got illness if they were not as closely related. So they're saying our father wasn't smoted by God because of something bad that he did.
Yeah. There was no divine judgment that resulted in the lack of a male offspring. So, given the kind of the randomness of the universe that we don't have a male living among us, that shouldn't besmirch us with some remnant of badness or evil or anything else. It's just kind of what happened.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting that that kind of ties in a little bit with Rashi's point too, that like it would be understood that everyone was righteous, from verse 1, and here, they're really spelling it out. Hey, just so you know, in case you're not tracking every one of the 600,000 people, this was a righteous man. He was not a rebel. Um, what was the sin? Why did he die? Why would it say for his own sin?
Everyone in that generation, almost everyone in that generation died because they were, the various reasons that they were not worthy of coming to the promised land.
Yeah. And we went over this a little bit. I can't remember whether it was here, but there was one really big reason, one big incident that happened where God pronounced doom. Gail, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, he was said by a lot of the rabbis to have been the wood gatherer. Who's the
Ah,
story just before this, and so he was punished for violating Shabbat.
ah. Yeah, so it could have been for violating Shabbat. He was also among the people in the incident of the spies, where God said, no one of this generation is going to survive to go to the promised land except for Caleb and Joshua. So, not a perfect people, but like any human, he just you know, died for his own things. It's interesting about the wood gatherers. I didn't know that one. That's good. Okay, so let's see what Rambam has to say about this. Going against someone want to unmute and sort of start reading, beginning with, but Rashi did not explain.
But Rashi did not explain why they, the daughters of Zelophehad, came to say that he died in his own sin when they should only have said, our father died in the wilderness and he had no sons. For that was the fitting way to say, since the cause of his death was not relevant, and it's not right for children to stress their father's sin. But in the opinion of our rabbis, they had to say that he was not among the company of Korach, because the company of Korach did not receive a portion in the land, and likewise the murmurers in the company of Korach and the daughters of Zelophehad knew this, because it had become known amongst the people from the court of Moses. And Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra explained it in a similar manner, saying that the daughters thought that those who had gathered together against the Eternal would not inherit in the land.
Okay, let's pause here. Okay, so Ramban Nachmanides, what argument? I mean, this is clearly something that a lot of thought has gone into. I mean, it's a very extraordinary moment where you're seeing women step forth and demand a share in the land. This is clearly not the custom. This was not the way that was done this. And the rabbis and the sages, they're trying to figure out, okay, well, if they came forth, why do they bring up this whole Korah thing? Why even mention your father was a sinner? And then our father was a saint. The man was a saint, and now his name will be lost. But that's not what they're doing. So, what's his interpretation? What's he saying here?
Well, there's a bit of kind of conventional wisdom that if somebody's lot in life is to be denied something or to suffer, somebody must have been guilty. They must have done something wrong or they didn't do something right. So the kind of the murmuring, to use the word here, among the people would be that, hey, this family is besmirched somehow. And they're going out of their way to say, no, they're not. These are righteous and deserving people and don't lump them in with all the naysayers and the evildoers. They need a special opportunity to plead their case.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Don't log us in. And what do you make of this last sentence? Ibn Ezra, he's referring to another commentator who lived hundreds of years, lived before him. The daughters thought that those who had gathered together against the Eternal would not inherit the land. So, what is that saying about the daughters? What kind of characteristic might you say they had?
I'm going to say they're a little bit on the judgment side as well, kind of putting their judgment in.
Yeah,
And
yeah, no, that's a good. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, absolutely. They're kind of from the righteous family. They're going to be not think well against those people who've turned against the eternal. And they have turned this into an argument. I mean, I also see this as maybe a little bit of political savvy
Mhm.
that they realize that, like, hey, if we're going to turn over this decision, if we're going to get what we feel is right and appropriate, we're going to have to make arguments and convince all these men that this is right. Okay. Now Nachmanides has his opinion about why they did. So I forget who was reading, but please continue.
In my opinion, according to the simple meaning of Scripture, they spoke in this way because they thought that Moses, our teacher, hated the company of Korach more than all other sinners who died in the desert, because they had rebelled against him and had denied the divine approval of all his deeds. Therefore, they thought that perhaps because he hated them, the company of Korah, he would say, "Let there be none to extend kindness unto him, neither let there be any to be gracious unto his fatherless children." Therefore, they informed him that their father was not one of them, and they
Okay, we
furthermore,
could pause here. Um, yeah, because this is like other stuff, but I think that's the main point. Okay, so why did they bring up he was not with Korach to Moses, according to Nachmanides' opinion?
It sounds very personal that Moses lived a long time and had a very long memory, and they're trying to kind of get out of the guilt by association thing. That anything that touched Korah to any degree would be judged harshly, and if we could break that connection, maybe the men would have a more open mind in deciding the fate of the women.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a a very uh, good description, but it dances around the central idea a little bit. You know, that Moses hated Korah. He hated him. I mean, Moses had anger issues. You know, Moses' anger got the better of him, and maybe so, according to Nachmanides, the dude held a grudge. And you
Yeah.
know,
If he
my
had, if Moses hadn't been angry, he wouldn't have killed one of the overseers, and therefore he wouldn't have been driven out into the wilderness, and therefore he wouldn't have, uh, you know. So his anger can be useful.
Yeah,
sure, it definitely was, you know, even our negative traits can lead to good outcomes. But I think, in my opinion, this is a very insightful comment thinking about Moses as a human being.
yeah.
And that, I remember when I was in rabbinical school, almost all of my teachers were great, but there was this one teacher for Talmud study, and he was very clear he was not a good fit. He was not the right teacher. And I spent hours talking with fellow students about how do we approach the deans and request a different teacher. And how do we do this in a way that they'll hear us so it doesn't seem personal, so that, you know, so I just kind of envision these women sitting around going, okay, this isn't right. How are we gonna get Moses to listen to us? You know, uh, does
And
that,
I just put into the chat a article from the Jewish Encyclopedia about Zelophehad and about some of the theories about what his sins were. And according to two of the sins, they would have died. He would have died very early in the Exodus.
hmm,
So his daughters would have been at least 40 years old.
uh-huh. Yeah,
Uh,
these were not teenage girls. These were, these were women of some age.
I
Uh,
love your story, and it led me to think they had a whole lot of time to think about how to make this case.
yeah, yeah. Okay, let's go a little bit deeper. Okay, so I think this is just a repetition of what we said before. Let our father's name not be lost to the clan. So give us a holding. So, okay, so now here's a thought from Jewish women in time. Uh, so thinking about, some commentary on this issue. So it's a little bit long, but I think it's interesting. Um, interesting. So I have a volunteer to read this next chunk.
I can go. Interestingly, Hazal, Talmud sages themselves were aware of the situation. In order to substantiate my remarks, I will quote from the Sifrei on the verse. The daughters of Zelophehad came forward. They stood before Moses. The Sifrei says, since the daughters of Zelophehad heard that the land would be divided amongst the tribes and given to the males and not to the females, they all gathered to take advice one from the other. They said, the compassion of God is not like the compassion of human beings, literally flesh and blood. Human beings have more compassion on males than on females, but the one who spoke and the world came into existence is not so. Rather, God has compassion on males and on females. God
Okay,
has
so
com-
pause. Let's just pause there. So she is quoting and paraphrasing from the Midrash, from the Sifrei, from rabbinic commentary from the early centuries of the Common Era. And so she's sort of saying it seems like they were aware of the situation. And so what are, I mean, I find this quite extraordinary. So what is it that they're talking about the compassion of humans and the compassion of the divine?
Humans are prejudiced. We tend to um, lump, give more compassion to certain groups at the time, perhaps to men than to women, but certainly there are other groups that we tend to think more favorably of.
Yeah,
Uh,
we tend to be judgmental. We build up dossiers on people. We either say this person's really good, they deserve a lot, or we check off a bunch of things that we, for whatever reason, aren't so thrilled about, and then that I don't know what kind of bends the judgment towards maybe I'm not going to be so kind to that person.
yeah, I like people from um, Ukraine better than people from Russia because of the war, something like that. But God isn't going to judge people that way. And even back in this time where that was a lot more patriarchal than now, when the Sifrei was written, they were acknowledging that God doesn't favor men over women.
Shelley, I saw you on mute.
Yeah, I just love how women's rights were being discussed back then, and that it was kind of put in there like, hey, there's a bit of a pushback here, women are just as important and we're part of this process and God made us as well.
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful segue that it seems to always be part of humanity, this who's better. But we're all better. We're all the best, right? But we all seem to, still have that belief system that, you know, I do this better than you, and it's all to do with judgment. It's unfortunate that we can't all embrace each other and just like these women stand up and say, hey, we deserve this, and eventually they're going to get married too, and men are going to come and take the land as well. So it's one of those things. It's all flows, right? Just flow with the universe. I don't know. It's interesting. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Shelley. Okay, so Marty, please continue.
We hear a kind of criticism which Hazal themselves have leveled about the laws of the division of the land. Seemingly, the issue is very simple. Because I believe in the Holy One, blessed be He, and because I believe that the Holy One, blessed be He, has compassion on all His creations, for this reason, all discrimination is forbidden to me. I am obligated to cleave to His deeds.
Okay, so Rachel Berkovitz, thank you, Marty. So how is she interpreting kind of this passage from Sifrei.
I'm gonna say, sorry, I'm just gonna say that she's saying that we're all equal, that God made us equal. That's how I take it.
Yeah, she is, and it seems like the Chazal are acknowledging their own shortcomings, or the Chazal are criticizing, the men in the Torah. Now, unfortunately, I don't think it's like they went the extra. They may have here and there carved out a little bit in this direction or that for women, but it's not like they're like, yeah, we're all equal. So you know, let's really start going down that path.
But
So why
still,
do
at that,
you,
at that time, that was probably a pretty radical statement.
it probably was. It probably was. And as much as we all want change right away, sometimes, it needs to be slow, and society can only change so much.
Just today, we're celebrating a statement in the United States that all men are created equal.
That's
It
right.
didn't say all people are created equal, and
Didn't
it
apply to all races at the time.
right.
Yeah, let's come back to that. Very good point. Okay, so we're back to our story. So what happens next? Moses goes before God, and God told Moses the plea of Zelophehad's daughters is just. You should give them a hereditary holding among their father's kinsmen, transfer their father's share to them. Further, speak to the Israelite people and say, if a man dies without a son, you shall transfer the property to his daughters. So what are you noticing about what does God do here? Like God said to Moses, if there's a problem you can't solve, come to me. And so I think that their argument was good enough for Moses to take it seriously. And Moses didn't feel like he had the authority to make a decision. So Moses went to God. And then what was God's decision? God
It
said
feels,
two things. Sorry.
sorry, it feels to me almost as if there's a bit of a setup where God is trying to get humanity as a civilization to recognize that there are real world problems that need to be solved to keep civilization balanced and to have justness and fairness in the world.
Mm,
And if you see something that's wrong, that's unjust, that's being neglected, then come up with some good ideas. And if you do it thoughtfully, you're probably doing the right thing.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. There's a certain moral intuition. You need to be thoughtful to bring justice. But God could have said, yeah, these women, they are descended from Joseph. Give them a share. Period. End of story. But that's not what God does. God creates a general rule that, no son, give it to the daughters. It doesn't say vet the character of the daughters. It doesn't say get a court of elders. You know, um, it's just in a similar way that you don't vet the character of a man who would inherit. Um,
But
we've created
it
a
also
general law.
does it doesn't say that the uh, daughters and sons get equal shares. It
Mhm.
says only if there isn't a son.
Right, right. So it's not like women were given equal rights, but it's almost like this is more about preserving the family name and the clan name than it was about giving justice to the women. They also didn't say, hey, we can farm, we can marry people and they can be the husbands and whatever. And it's like, no, this is about the ancestry. So um, it was a piece of justice, but it was hardly solving the whole issue. Um,
I
okay,
would inherit because I have no brothers, but Neil's sister wouldn't inherit.
mm, there we go. So what is also interesting is this almost mirrors like what we see in the Mishnah and the Talmud later, where there's a problem that's brought to the rabbis, and then the rabbis solve it and pronounce a law. And the rabbis sort of claimed that they had inherited all of this knowledge from Mount Sinai and that they took upon themselves to kind of do this pronouncement the way that God does. Like, yeah, I'll offer a corrective. There's a hole in the law that was given, so we need to re-examine and fill the hole.
I think there's also a bit of a hint that the divine is not going to go on for all of eternity solving these kinds of problems if you reason out the solution, and that the Talmudic interpretation you just discussed reinforces that wise humans are going to own the future of their code of justice, and not everything is going to get brought to the mountain anymore.
Yeah. Yeah,
Time,
it just kind of pre-configure that.
time of prophecy is over. People who claim now to speak on behalf of God, we don't believe them anymore.
Yeah, we look at the words of the Torah and use that to extract additional meaning. Um, so Rashi has an interesting sort of take on this. Um, Starting with this, again, another quote from Sifrei, tells us that the women, they saw something that Moses did not. They had a finer perception of what was just in the law of inheritance than Moses had. And I included the whole thing in the source sheet. I don't think we'll go through it now, but if you're curious, you can look into it. But there's a interesting piece of this. It's also like, well, why, it doesn't seem like it's a complicated issue, but Moses didn't really see, he saw that he didn't feel he could make this decision. The daughters could see that this was a wrong. Um, and so I got really interested. There were a couple of commentaries from the Akedat Yitzhak, which was a bunch of chapters, 105 gates with a sermon. Each sermon discusses a philosophical ideas. And, Akedat Yitzchak, that's the binding of Isaac. So I think that's kind of a clever, it's like, that's a very perplexing what's going on story. So he's kind of bringing up these using tales like this one to try to extract general philosophical principles. And so where he goes with this, I think, is fascinating. So first, he just starts talking about, well, there's two readings that I brought forward. So could someone read this? Uh, it's like questions that perplex him about the story. Well, I can read this one. Why did God not spell out the rights of the daughters when Moses was instructed? Okay. The daughters, in this case, it's hard to understand. If it had been the custom for daughters to inherit, why did they raise the issue at all? If, on the other hand, daughters did not inherit under any circumstances, how did they dare to raise the issue? Maimonides pointed out, Maimonides thinks this all has to do with the cause of their father's death, but he was right. Why did Moses have to ask God about the halakha or about the law? So already we're seeing he's a medieval rabbi. He is deep in like understanding the laws, and he is retrojecting this idea of halakha back into the Torah. So, how could the daughters have seen something that Moses didn't? And how could Moses be expected to know something if it hadn't been put in the law? Why did their daughters say their father died in the desert? Everybody died in the desert. And why is that relevant to this issue? Um, why was Moses asked? All right, so this is how these are things that happen later. So what stands out for you about this kind of reasoning process, these questions? Do you find it interesting, irrelevant? What's your take on this?
Something that's jumping at me kind of out of the blue, and I doubt it's totally central to this. I'll bring it up just to consider, is that women as mothers tend to be very thoughtful about exploring the future. What am I going to leave my children? Am I going to provide for them the means to have a good life? Am I going to support my family in such a way they will survive? And I mean, I see that in nature. This morning we were out walking, and there was a mother duck with some ducklings, and she's got her head way up in the air. She's putting herself in danger to provide for her little ones and to take a lot of risks. And to me, it feels as if an immortal and a bunch of men may not be quite as hypersensitive to that need for
Hmm.
survival as the women might.
Yeah, interesting, Neil. Thank you. Yeah, so maybe they could see something just because they're women and they see the world differently. I see one thing that jumps out at me kind of related to that is he's wondering how could Moses not have known this? Moses was the greatest teacher, you know, and how could he have known something that, hadn't been legislated, as if we can only know right or wrong if it's been legislated. Like if God hasn't explicitly said this, if the rabbis haven't, then there's no sense of right or wrong, which is certainly not my sensibility. I think this is probably like a straw man or a stalking horse type of argument, but this is clearly kind of what, someone who's has a philosophical bent, who's kind of deeply ruling, going through this. So then he goes in a really interesting direction in this other reading. Okay, so I'd like someone else to read this. I know there
I
aren't
could,
many of us, but we'll all take turns.
I could go. If the task of the Messiah is to teach people to lay aside their swords and so forth, then it is clear that when natural law rules, harmony will be restored to the world. Torah embodies this natural law, and this is the reason Abraham could divine it without having it revealed to him.
Okay,
Matan
pause.
Torah.
Let's pause there. So what is he? So again, this is a medieval rabbi. So what is he assuming about Abraham and the Torah?
So Moses received the complete revelation according to our tradition. So Abraham uh, didn't.
He was operating much more instinctually. He'd observe what was going on around him and then try to read the signs of the world and say, yeah, this probably makes the most sense. So Allison, you do an interesting distinction that Moses had a rule book, Abraham really didn't. And sometimes when you get too literal, you can miss the big picture.
Yes, but I think that's part of what he's saying, but I think he's saying something even more sort of striking. Torah embodies this natural law. And
So
that
a methodology to think about the natural law. But you got to think. You got to get outside the words a little bit.
Well, if
One of the
God,
one of the things that the rabbis like to say is that Abraham knew all of the 613 commandments. He was so righteous, he was so persuasive, and I think this is also kind of part of that worldview. And he's, when you're talking about natural law and natural rules and harmony and Torah being a part of this, that's why, Abraham, he could do it. Okay, so let's continue. Matan Torah means the gift of Torah, was only the revelation of a law which had existed before man had been created. In fact, it had been the blueprint with the help of which God created the universe. Okay, so now we're into this mystical idea that the Torah existed before creation and that God used the Torah as the blueprint of creation. So this is an extraordinary jump that I honestly don't know the whole history of where it came from. It certainly came out of the mystic scale. Do you know more about that idea?
Well, there certainly is a whole body of Midrash that says that God looked in the Torah and consulted it, and oh, this is how I'm supposed to create the universe, and so did use the Torah. So God wrote the Torah, but the Torah wrote God. Kind of goes back and forth, but there's a long pedigree of that God used the Torah and looked in it in order to know how to create the universe.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
so I was just listening to something about Spinoza, and Spinoza what took the next step of saying nature and God are the same thing. And there's some echoes of this that
mhm.
this is still putting God and nature somewhat separate, but there's echoes that there's this interconnection without going to the point of being blasphemous the way Spinoza was interpreted.
Mhm.
So to push on that a little, our congregation's name, B'nai Torah, Children of the Torah, implies that we all have some ownership, responsibility, maybe even insight into what the divine wants. And I get the feeling there's a hint here that these women had some wisdom
Mhm.
around how the world works that maybe Moses didn't have access to. He hadn't quite figured out how to tap into them.
Yeah. Yeah. He's almost putting the women on the level of Abraham, these people that didn't even need to see the written words, didn't need to. So these two very different takes, one like up here, he's going, well, how could Moses have done this if he didn't know the law? It's like, hey, I didn't have the Torah. No one made a halakhic ruling on this. What was I supposed to do? But here, he's talking about, the Torah has been around even before creation, and some people just get it. Some people intuit, what it has to say. There's another teaching that the Torah has, uh, black fire on a white background and white fire on a black background. And this idea that the white fire is what's not written down, but it has where like all these other ideas, the spirit of, you could call that the spirit of the law. Um, and so, very interesting to see. Um, of course, this again isn't universalizing the way that the Torah is, where it's like all women get this, but these clever women were the ones that figured out um, why this should be done. Okay, so um, Allison, you brought up the Declaration of Independence and all all men are created equal. So there's a source sheet by Mary Otis called Letter from the Birmingham Jail from Martin Luther King. So let's read. I just took a few excerpts from it.
I don't want to take away if either Shelley or Gail want to read, but I could do it if they don't.
Go for it,
So
Allison.
Shelley's saying, okay, we have waited for more than 340 years for a constitutional and God given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet like speed towards gaining political independence, but we still creep at horse and buggy pace towards gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter.
Okay, let's pause here. So, um, what's he saying here? He's sitting in jail, arrested for civil disobedience.
And
Um,
people are still at that time turned away from lunch counters because they have dark skin.
yeah,
And
and
you seem to,
there's
we already know what the right answer is, but we're being plodding and stubborn and judgmental about it.
mhm.
And
And the
we
vast
still are.
majority of white Americans thought, like in the 60s, I think like 65% of Americans thought that civil rights was going too quickly. I mean,
Yeah,
this was probably written in the 50s, I'm guessing. I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was, all these people like, hey, hey, slow down, we'll take care of it. He's like, look, all these countries are getting their full independence and I can't get a freaking cup of coffee. Okay. So please, I skipped toward the end of the letter now. Please
okay.
continue.
I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern, since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in the public schools. At first glance, it may seem rather paradoxical for us to consciously to break laws. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all.
Okay. So, we only have a couple minutes left. Can I stop the share? I want to talk about this, but I can leave it up if we want to do that. Actually, I'm going to leave it up because I want to look at the text. So, what is King's argument and how does it relate to what we've been talking about?
I'm
Well,
going to say, it comes down to common sense, and you know, as he said, Moses didn't have the capability at that point to tap into to see that there was a situation that could be, you know, amicably made happy. And it's the same thing with Martin Luther. When you look at all the craziness of racism and stuff, and it's really just pure common sense and loving everybody
mm,
and recognizing that we all are humans. And it's I don't know why there is that part in between that causes people to not want to be able to give love to their neighbor. I That's one of the biggest things that I always try and understand where our own humanity comes in.
I wish we knew the answer to that. Yeah.
I think it's very deeply ingrained in humankind, and if you're able to step away from it, that's very elevated. Perhaps Musar has made you more able to step away from it. I still have a lot of hatred towards people that I, see as being anti-Semitic or
Mm.
not having the same morality as I do.
Hmm. Thank you,
Yeah,
Allison.
yeah. And thank you, Greg, for Musar. Blessings.
Um, you're welcome, but I did not create it. I just helped bring the tradition forward. Um, there's this thing earlier where it said, where was it? It was that the men tend to favor the men, but men have compassion on men, but God has compassion on everyone.
Hmm.
And what I'm seeing here is he is very subtly talking about the laws created by humans can be just or unjust. But when he goes to St. Augustine and unjust law, when you're talking about something being unjust, you're getting into like almost natural law or God's law. Like here in the Torah, there's no distinction between God's law and the human law.
Hmm.
There is no government that is legislating anything that isn't taught by God. So they go to God, and God is like, yeah, this is pretty common sense, you know. But here we are in a world of human laws, and King is rightly pointing out that a human law can be unjust. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right. I mean, the Nazis passed laws to create the Holocaust.
Hmm.
That's about as unjust. There are unjust laws all over the world, um, and these laws in the United States were completely unjust. And so it takes people willing to step forward and to try to create arguments that people could hear. Just as the daughters put a lot of thought into what can we say that Moses will listen to enough to go to God. Here King in this letter, which has been read and studied for what, 70 years now or so, was putting forth ideas that he was trying to get white audiences to hear. The women needed the men to hear them enough to take them seriously. And that was King's challenge.
So if you go down to where you repeat the uh, passage, it says the plea is just.
Yeah,
So that's
that's right. It's like, and thank you for bringing us back to that, because it's almost like the Torah is saying, look at justice. Evaluate, is this a just or unjust situation? King is saying, is this a just or unjust law? And, you know, here, it's a matter of natural law, right? It's like there are just certain principles that of justice.
Reminds me so much of the Supreme Court arguments. If anybody has ever had the chance to listen to the live stream or even the printed output, that there are a group that will go back and try to understand in 1787 what would they have thought, and then they'll construct an originalist argument that takes us to the present day. Then there are other people that will look from the present backwards of what is right and what is just, and how does that connect with our origins. And if those two views can't find somewhere to meet in the middle, invariably things get really, really messy. And we're seeing that over and over again with split decisions where they can't connect the idea of what's right and just today with what they thought people were looking at 250 years ago. And I feel that's part of why we're broken as a country right now.
Hmm. Thank you, Neil. All right. Yeah, Shelley.
I was just going to say, we have to ask God more.
Hmm. Yeah, great point.
a lot of people ask God and come up with very different answers
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
I think it's just.
And I'd go, we need to ask other humans more. We need to listen. We we're all such terrible listeners. I put myself on the top of that heap. That it's so easy to come up with an opinion. It's so much more challenging to be willing to hear somebody else out and understand where they're coming from and try to have a little empathy for where they're at. And if we could do
Yes.
that, I think there's so much strength we could build.
Yes. It's unfortunate that we put our own thoughts into somebody else's ideas and instead of looking at it with compassion and love. It's love is the biggest thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Well, as we wrap up, Marty and Gail will give you a chance for any final thoughts or comments before we say goodbye today.
Well, I actually do have a different perspective that I was just waiting for an opportunity to bring it up, which is
Oh, please.
Moses was trying to hand a law that people were going to live by, this new nation that was being formed, that was supposed to serve God as the original king and have this whole framework of laws. So he couldn't just create legislation. If there's no precedent, he has to find out what it's going to be. So I think he went to God because he had to. There's
Mhm.
no precedent in the law. He's not going to make something up. He just came through the Korach rebellion where I didn't even take a donkey from anybody.
Mhm.
I'm doing exactly what God has appointed me to do. And so I think he had to go to God. I don't think it shows the weakness. I think he was doing what the right thing was. The daughters of Zelophehad were merely defending their own position, which is this isn't fair and we want a hearing. But
Mm.
he couldn't just rule without there being a precedent because that's not how law codes are developed.
I love that point, Gail, and especially powerful because Korach's charge against him was, who put you in charge? And here
Right,
Moses is bending over backwards to say, hey, I'm not in charge. God is in charge.
right.
So we got to go to the divine to figure out what to do. Thank you. Marty, did you have something you wanted to add?
It's all kind of mind-boggling. Boggling. I seems to me though people are animals, they're unique from other animals, maybe in our ability to conceptualize and come up with thoughts, and inevitably there's an element of of the bad or the negative in all of us, and uh, so how to get that out? Far be it for me to expound on that.
Well, thank you, Marty. I think we will leave it there for today. And if you are still watching this video, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful discussion. Please give us a like or a share so social media knows to pass this on to others who may be interested.
Mm.
And jump over to Sepharia to see the short source sheet, or go by rabbigregmarcus.com under Torah Tuesday and sign up, and you can come and participate in this Zoom directly. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.